My parents skipped my son's funeral. They didn't show up. Not a single flower, not a single tear, not even a text. Instead, I got a message that made my chest cave in like someone had punched straight through my heart. My mother wrote, "We're sorry, but our anniversary is too special for mourning. You'll understand one day." Understand? How could I ever understand that the people who raised me chose champagne and dancing over burying their own grandson? How could anyone? I stood at that graveside clutching my boy's favorite stuffed dinosaur, shaking so hard I thought I'd collapse into the dirt. The pastor's voice blurred. The air was heavy with the scent of wet roses. Everyone stared at the empty space where my parents should have been. And in that moment, a rage I had never felt before burned through me, hotter than grief itself. I swore right then that they would regret it, that I would make them feel pain sharper than any loss, shame deeper than any grave. But the way it all unfolded, the way I finally got my revenge, nobody saw that coming. Because what began at that graveside ended with flashing police lights, shattered lives, and me standing in a courtroom where everyone was forced to hear the truth. And now, you're probably wondering, how could a daughter go that far? Stick with me, because you're about to find out. Like, watch, and subscribe for more. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 32 years old, a single mom, or I guess I was, until the day my world collapsed. My little boy, Jacob, was my everything. He had curly blonde hair that always stuck up in the mornings, and the brightest green eyes that could soften even the coldest soul. He was 7 when it happened. 7 years of laughter, Legos scattered across the living room, and bedtime stories whispered under a blanket fort. I grew up in what most people would call a perfect family. My parents, Linda and Charles Carter, were high school sweethearts. Everyone envied their marriage. They threw big anniversary parties every single year, the kind where neighbors came just to peek at the decorations. My younger brother, Ryan, was the golden child. He always made my parents proud: straight A's, football scholarships, law school. Meanwhile, I was the one who rushed into motherhood, the one who ruined her chances by marrying Jacob's father young. But when Jacob's father, Mark, walked out on us, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally rally around me. For a while, they did. They babysat sometimes, took us out to dinner, even called Jacob their little joy. But the older he got, the more distant they became. Birthdays were skipped for vacations. School plays were too last minute. Still, I never imagined they could do what they eventually did. The day everything started unraveling was ordinary at first. Jacob had been sick for weeks, an infection that spiraled out of control. Doctors kept saying he'd be fine, but then his tiny body just couldn't fight anymore. I was there when the machines flatlined. I screamed until nurses had to hold me up. Losing a child is like losing your own breath. You're alive, but barely. I called my parents that night. My voice was shredded, but I managed to tell them Jacob was gone. My mother went quiet for a long time before whispering, "Oh, Emily, that's tragic. But you know, your father and I already booked a trip to Napa for our anniversary. We'll see what we can do." I remember staring at the phone like it had betrayed me. My only child was dead, and all she could talk about was wine country. Still, I held on to hope. I thought they'd come around, that once the funeral date was set, they'd cancel everything. Families fight. Families disappoint. But families show up when it counts, right?
Wrong.
On the morning of the funeral, my mother sent that text. The one that said their anniversary was too special for mourning. And that was it. They were gone. The whispers at the cemetery were loud. My aunts shook their heads. Friends muttered, "Can you believe it?" I felt my face burn with humiliation. As if burying my son wasn't cruel enough, my parents had branded me with shame. That night, after the dirt covered Jacob's coffin and everyone left, I sat in the dark of my living room with his dinosaur pressed to my chest. And something inside me snapped. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was planning. And the first step of my plan started with a phone call I knew would change everything. A phone call that dragged secrets out of the shadows, secrets my parents had buried for decades. When the person on the other end picked up, their voice trembled. And with that single conversation, I set into motion a chain of events that would end in blood, prison walls, and a family legacy destroyed forever. But before I tell you who I called, you need to know what kind of family I really came from. Because once you see the truth, you'll understand why revenge wasn't just an option. It was survival. I made the call. It was to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my Aunt Caroline, my mother's older sister. She lived 3 states away and had cut ties with my parents long before Jacob was even born. My parents never talked about her, except to say she was unstable and toxic. But in my gut, I always knew that wasn't the whole story. Families don't erase a sister for nothing. When she picked up, her voice was raspy, like she'd been smoking and crying at the same time. "Emily," she said, disbelief heavy in her tone. "Why are you calling me?" The dam inside me broke. I told her everything, the funeral, the text, the anniversary trip. I expected pity, maybe a quiet "I'm sorry." Instead, she whispered words that chilled my bones. "Of course they didn't come. You think your parents ever cared about you? About Jacob? Emily, you don't know half of what they've done." I froze. "What are you talking about?" Caroline took a shaky breath. "You deserve to know. But once you do, there's no turning back." And she told me. She told me things about my parents I couldn't believe at first. How their perfect marriage was nothing but a mask. How money, betrayal, and even something darker bound them together. Caroline claimed my father wasn't just a cheater, but a man involved in crimes that had destroyed lives. And my mother? She wasn't the innocent victim. She helped cover it all up. I remember sitting there in my dark living room, clutching Jacob's dinosaur so hard my nails dug into the fabric, listening to her reveal pieces of my family I didn't recognize. "You think skipping a funeral is cruel?" Caroline's voice trembled with fury. "Emily, that's nothing compared to what they've done. Do you want proof?" "Because I have it." My heart slammed in my chest.
Proof. Secrets. Lies.
My parents weren't just selfish. They were dangerous. And suddenly, my grief twisted into something sharper. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about exposing the truth. I agreed to meet Caroline in person. She promised she'd give me documents, evidence that would tear my parents' perfect image apart. The night before I left, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed Jacob's last smile, the empty seats at his funeral, and my mother's text. I whispered to the ceiling, "I'll make them pay, baby. I promise." When I got to Caroline's house the next day, the place looked worn down, the kind of house people drive past without noticing. She opened the door and pulled me into the kind of hug that made me feel both safe and terrified. "You look just like her," she muttered, shaking her head. "Like Linda before she became what she is." We sat at her kitchen table, and she slid a manila folder across to me. Inside were photos, letters, bank records, pieces of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. But one thing was clear. My parents weren't who they pretended to be. As I flipped through the papers, my hands shaking, Caroline leaned closer and whispered, "Once this comes out, Emily, it'll destroy them. But it'll destroy you too, if you're not careful." I should have listened. Because 2 nights later, Caroline was found dead. The police called it suicide. They said she'd overdosed. But I knew better. She was scared, yes, but she was also determined. She wouldn't have left me with those files just to vanish. I still remember standing outside her house, police tape fluttering in the wind, clutching that manila folder under my coat. Reporters were already circling, neighbors gossiping. And in the crowd, across the street, I swear I saw him, my father. He was watching me, his face calm, too calm, like a man who knew every move I was about to make. That's when I realized this wasn't just about betrayal at a funeral anymore. This was war. And I was already in too deep to turn back. I couldn't breathe when I saw him standing across the street that night. My father, Charles Carter, dressed in his usual neat blazer, hands in his pockets like he was just out for a stroll. His eyes locked on mine, steady and cold. He didn't wave. He didn't move. He just watched. The moment I blinked, he was gone. But the message was clear. I wasn't safe anymore. Caroline's death wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. I went back home with the folder hidden under my mattress, terrified but determined. Every page inside screamed betrayal, offshore accounts, bribes, business deals laced with corruption, and letters written in my mother's own hand that proved she wasn't just complicit, she orchestrated half of it. The people I had called Mom and Dad weren't just cruel for skipping Jacob's funeral. They were monsters hiding behind smiles and toasts. That night, I couldn't stop pacing. My heart said, take this straight to the police. But my gut whispered, you don't know how deep this goes. Who do you think paid those cops? So instead, I made a choice that changed everything. I confronted my parents directly. I showed up at their house unannounced. It was late, but I knew they'd be awake. They always stayed up drinking wine together like teenagers in love. I banged on the door until my mother opened it, her silk robe tied lazily around her waist. Emily, she blinked in surprise, her voice dripping with annoyance. What are you doing here? I shoved past her. My father was in the living room, sipping whiskey, smirking like he'd been waiting for me. Where were you two the night Caroline died? I demanded, my voice shaking. My father raised a brow. Careful, Emily. That's an ugly question. My mother crossed her arms. Caroline was unstable. You know that. If you're here to blame us for her choices. Don't, I snapped. My hands were fists at my side. Don't stand there and lie to me.
I know about the accounts.
The bribes. I know everything. For a second, their perfect masks cracked. My father's jaw clenched. My mother's eyes darted, just for a moment, before she plastered on a smile. Sweetheart, she said softly, stepping closer. Grief makes people imagine things. You've lost so much. We understand. I felt my stomach twist. She was gaslighting me. Even in the face of proof, she wanted to make me doubt myself. But I didn't doubt anymore. You didn't just skip Jacob's funeral. I hissed, tears burning in my eyes. You killed your own sister. And I'm going to prove it. That's when my father finally spoke, his voice low, deadly calm. If you ever breathe a word of this to anyone, he said, swirling the ice in his glass, you won't just lose your parents. You'll lose everything. Your job, your home, maybe even your freedom. Because we know things too, Emily. Things about you. My blood turned cold. What are you talking about? I whispered. He leaned forward, his smile sharp. You think you're innocent in all this? You've made mistakes, Emily. And if we go down, we'll make sure you go down harder. I wanted to scream, to slap that smug look off his face. But before I could, my mother pressed a hand to my arm. Her touch was ice. Go home, she murmured. Forget all of this. And for God's sake, stop digging. Or you'll regret it. I stumbled out of their house, my heart pounding like a drum. Their threat wasn't empty. They had power, connections, money. But I also had something they didn't, Caroline's folder. And I wasn't about to let them silence me. That night, I made copies of every single document. I hid them in 3 different places, one in my apartment, one in my friend Sarah's house, and one mailed anonymously to a P.O. box I'd rented under a fake name. If my parents wanted to destroy me, they have to find every single piece. But I underestimated how fast they could move. Because 2 weeks later, I came home to find my apartment door kicked in.
Drawers dumped.
Clothes shredded. The folder under my mattress gone. And worse, there was blood on my kitchen floor. A trail of it, leading toward the bathroom. I froze in the doorway, my body trembling. Whoever had been here wasn't just searching. They had hurt someone. And when I pushed open that bathroom door, what I found made me drop to my knees, screaming. The bathroom floor was slick with blood. My heart nearly stopped as I saw a body slumped against the tub. It was Sarah. Her eyes fluttered weakly, her shirt soaked crimson. My best friend. The only person I trusted enough to hide one of the copies. Emily, she gasped, her voice broken. They know. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against the wound in her side, desperate to stop the bleeding. Tears blurred my vision. Stay with me, Sarah. Please, just hold on. She winced, coughing. They came 2 men. Said if I ever touched that folder again, they'd finish it. My chest tightened. My parents. Of course it was them. They hadn't just ransacked my apartment. They'd tracked down Sarah too. She must have fought back, and they punished her for it. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, dialing 911. The operator's voice felt miles away as I shouted for an ambulance. Blood pooled around my knees, warm and terrifying. When the sirens finally wailed outside, I thought relief would flood me. But as the EMTs pushed through the door, I caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. One of the paramedics looked at me too long. His eyes didn't move like a stranger's. They moved like someone who knew me. His lips curved in the faintest smirk before he looked away. I didn't trust him. Still, they carried Sarah out on a stretcher, her hand clutching mine until the very last second. "Don't let them win," she whispered before the doors closed. That night, alone in the wreckage of my apartment, I realized something horrifying. My parents weren't just fighting to protect their reputation. They were willing to spill blood. Sarah had nearly died because of me. But there was no going back now. I dug through the chaos, searching desperately for anything they hadn't taken. And buried under overturned clothes, I found it. A flash drive Caroline must have slipped into the folder before she died. It was small, cracked on one side, but still intact. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop. The screen blinked, and a set of encrypted files appeared. With every click, my pulse raced faster. These weren't just bank records. They were videos. The first one showed my father sitting in a dimly lit room, stacks of cash on the table. He was shaking hands with a man whose face I couldn't fully see. But the voice was clear. It was a city councilman. And what they were discussing, bribes for contracts, threats against whistleblowers, was enough to destroy not just my parents, but powerful people tied to them. The second video was worse. My mother. She was standing in our old backyard, speaking to a woman I didn't recognize. The conversation was hushed, but clear enough. She was arranging something. No. Someone's silence. The words, "if she talks, she disappears," made my skin crawl. Caroline hadn't been paranoid. She'd been right all along. I leaned back, my chest heaving. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a criminal empire. And now I had the proof. But proof meant nothing if I couldn't survive long enough to use it. The next morning, I drove straight to the police station with the flash drive in my bag. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. If I was wrong, if the cops were on my parents' payroll, I'd be walking into a trap. But Sarah was in the hospital fighting for her life. Caroline was dead. Jacob was gone. I couldn't run anymore. I marched inside and demanded to speak to a detective. They led me to a small office where a man introduced himself as Detective Harris. He had kind eyes, the kind that made me want to believe. I handed him the flash drive, my voice cracking as I said, This will explain everything."
He plugged it in.
The screen lit up. For a few seconds, I felt hope. Then his expression changed. Not shock. Not anger. A slow, calculated smile. "Emily," he said softly, leaning back in his chair. "You shouldn't have come here." My blood turned to ice. Before I could move, 2 uniformed officers stepped inside the room, blocking the door. And Detective Harris whispered, "Your parents send their regards." My throat closed up. The room shrank around me. Detective Harris's words echoed in my head. "Your parents send their regards." This wasn't a police station anymore. It was a cage. The 2 officers stepped closer. My pulse hammered in my ears. I glanced at the laptop, my only proof still plugged in, but Harris calmly shut it, sliding the flash drive into his pocket like it belonged to him. Panic surged through me. "You can't." He cut me off with a smile. Emily, you really think you're the first one to try to bring them down? Your parents have been paying to keep this city quiet for decades. And you, sweetheart, are about to disappear just like your aunt." The officers grabbed my arms, their grip bruising. I screamed, kicking, thrashing, desperate to break free. "Get off me!" My voice cracked, wild with terror. But they didn't listen. They dragged me down a back hallway, not toward the holding cells, but toward a metal door that led to the underground parking garage. My heart slammed against my ribs. This wasn't procedure. This was an execution. I fought harder, sinking my nails into one officer's arm, stomping on the other's foot. One of them cursed, but their grip never loosened. When the door swung open, the cold air of the garage hit my face, and there it was. A black SUV idling, engine purring. The kind of car my father always drove. The back door opened, and for the first time since Caroline's death, I saw her face again. My mother. Linda Carter stepped out, perfectly dressed, hair in place, as if she were on her way to brunch instead of a kidnapping. Her eyes swept over me with no emotion. "Emily," she said softly, almost tenderly, "why couldn't you just let Jacob rest in peace?" Hearing his name on her lips shattered something inside me. "Don't you dare say his name," I spat, tears streaming down my cheeks. "You weren't even there for him." Her face hardened. "Because his funeral was your tragedy, not ours. We couldn't let your mess interfere with our lives." Rage boiled through me. Mess? He was your grandson. For the first time, I saw the truth in her eyes, cold, hollow. There was no love there. Not for me. Not for Jacob. Not for anyone but herself. She motioned to the officers. "Put her in the car." I thrashed, screamed, begged anyone in that empty garage to hear me. But there was no one. Just the echo of my voice bouncing off concrete walls. The SUV door loomed closer. My lungs burned. This was it. They were going to make me vanish like Caroline. But just as the officers shoved me forward, the sharp crack of gunfire split the air. One of the officers dropped instantly, blood spraying across the concrete. The other stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. I froze, heart hammering. My mother screamed, ducking behind the SUV. And from the shadows of the garage, a figure stepped out, gun in hand, eyes locked on me. It wasn't the police. It wasn't my father. It was Ryan, my brother. The golden child, the one who always stood by my parents, the one who never questioned them. He lowered the gun slightly, his face pale. "Emily," he said, his voice shaking. "We need to talk. Now." "Ryan." My voice cracked as I stumbled backward, staring at the gun in his hand. My brother, the golden child, the one who had always defended our parents. He kept his eyes on me, chest rising and falling fast. "Emily, I had to do it. They were going to kill you." Behind the SUV, my mother's voice rang out, sharp as glass. "Ryan, don't you dare betray us."
Betray.
The word cut the air in two. Ryan's hand trembled, but he didn't lower the gun. "I've been watching them, Emily. For years. Pretending.
Doing everything they asked.
But after Jacob, I couldn't stomach it anymore.
I saw what they did to Caroline.
I knew you were next." Tears blurred my vision. "Then help me end this." My mother stepped out slowly, her hands raised, her perfect composure cracking for the first time. "Ryan, honey, listen to me. Your sister doesn't understand. She's sick with grief. You shoot me, you destroy this family." Ryan's jaw clenched. "You destroyed this family the moment you chose greed over your own grandson." The words hung in the cold garage air. My mother's lips quivered, her mask finally slipping. Before she could speak again, a new sound echoed. Footsteps. My father emerged from the shadows, calm as ever, his own gun gleaming under the harsh lights. "Enough," he said, his voice steady. "Ryan, give me the gun. Emily, hand over the drive." He thought he still held all the power. But for the first time, I realized something. He was wrong. Because I had Ryan, and I had the flash drive, and I had nothing left to lose. "No," I said, my voice steadying. "This ends tonight." Time seemed to slow. My father's eyes narrowed. Ryan's finger hovered near the trigger. My mother edged closer to the SUV door, desperate to escape. And then chaos exploded. 2 shots rang out, one from Ryan, one from my father. The sound ricocheted off the walls, deafening. I screamed. When the smoke cleared, my father was on the ground, his gun skidding across the concrete. Blood spread beneath him. He wasn't moving. Ryan stood frozen, chest heaving, the gun still in his hand. His eyes were wide, but he was alive. My mother shrieked, running to my father's side. She cradled him, her robe soaked in his blood. "Charles, stay with me." Her cries turned into raw, guttural wails as she realized he was gone. Then she turned on us, her face twisted with fury, eyes wild. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've done. Everything we built, everything we protected, it's bigger than us. Bigger than you." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Bigger than us? How deep did this go? But before I could respond, police sirens wailed outside.
Real ones this time.
Neighbors must have heard the shots. The garage flooded with red and blue lights. Officers stormed in, weapons raised. And for once, they weren't here to protect my parents. Ryan dropped the gun immediately, hands raised. I clutched the flash drive in my pocket, stepping forward with a voice that shook but didn't break. "They killed my aunt. They tried to kill me. This," I held up the drive, "has everything you need." The officers swarmed, cuffing Ryan gently, cuffing my mother roughly as she screamed curses at me, her voice echoing through the garage. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret it." But I didn't. Because weeks later, I stood in a courtroom, the folder and flash drive now public evidence. My parents' empire unraveled piece by piece. Politicians, businessmen, all of them dragged into the light. My father's crimes sealed in death. My mother's fate sealed in a prison sentence she could never escape. And me? I stood there as the daughter they thought they could silence, the mother they abandoned at her child's funeral. The woman who took everything they tried to bury and turned it into their destruction. When the judge banged the gavel and sentenced my mother to life without parole, I felt Jacob with me. His little laugh in the back of my mind. His hand in mine. Justice wasn't enough to bring him back. Nothing ever would. But it was enough to make sure his death wasn't forgotten. As the guards dragged my mother away, she looked at me one last time, venom dripping from her words. "You killed this family." I didn't flinch. I stared her straight in the eyes and whispered back, "No, you did." And when I walked out of that courtroom, the cameras flashing, reporters shouting, I lifted my head high. Because this wasn't just my story. It was a warning. That no matter how powerful evil pretends to be, the truth will always find a way out. And if you've stayed with me this far, you know this. Justice is never given. It's taken. So watch and subscribe because this was only the beginning.